Kenneth Lin. Welcome to LA Theater Works, and thanks for joining us.
Oh, very glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Where did you get the inspiration for this story?
Yeah, well, as a writer, you always have your antenna up, right, for what's going to speak to the moment and speak to how you're feeling about the moment. And I happened to be at a party, and I struck up a conversation with somebody that I didn't know, and it was what do you do for a living, blah 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 blah. And then suddenly he was like, yeah, what I do is I set the value of human life in wrongful death cases. And in that moment, it was just so clear to my muse and my antenna that this was something that's just right in front of our faces that we all experience in our lives. Like deep down, we all know, but not everybody's life is valued the same way. And here is a person who is doing it in a very, very concrete kind of way. So the minute I heard what he did for a living, I was just glued to him for the rest of the party, and I just wanted to know everything about what he did, and because it just spoke to me as something that's so real, right? We know that certain people, Donald Trump gets COVID-19 and he gets airlifted over to Walter Reed, right? And he gets to be in the White House with which essentially has an in-house hospital. Not everyone gets to have that, right? His life has been valued differently than all of us. And I think that, as a writer who tries to have his finger on what we're experiencing and what we're feeling, it really reminded me oh, this is how most people feel about their lives, and probably a lot of where we stand politically and where we stand emotionally in terms of our relationship to society has a lot to do with how we feel we've been valued.
Can you tell us what you see in Mitch Bloom?
Well, I think he's a person who's found himself in a particular position within a system, right? And that's very much like all of us. And it happens to be a position within the system that comes with a lot of benefits. And I think it was important for me in terms of creating the character to create somebody who, had a rarefied special position within the system, but also came at it from a place of deep disappointment.
What does it say about our lives that we have to attach some kind of a dollar value to who we are?
It reminds me of a conversation that I had with a friend of mine who was a really wonderful person, but he really believed that wealthy people should be the people who really decided on a lot of how society should be structured and ordered. And I said, why? And he said, well, what else do we have? What else is concrete that allows us to determine somebody's place and allows us to prove that this person is intellectually capable and has the wisdom to help us define politics and society? And I thought, well, there's a lot of concrete things that we're not looking at. The number of conversations that a person has in a day, or the number of books that somebody has read, or the number of children that somebody has raised. So I like that the play asks that question of, is this thing that's so easy for us to grasp and so potent, is this the thing that should really decide how valuable somebody's life is worth, how much wisdom they possess, how much value they have to society? And I think we all know that the answer is no, right? But we're so lost sometimes and out of place that we just grab onto the easiest thing.
What draws you to these unconventional ideas?
I think the great joy of being a writer is how you're constantly being changed by your subject matter. It's sort of like knowledge inoculation. Right. And, so when I see myself deeply in someone else, then I just really want to lean in, because I feel like I'll be that's my way of understanding other people. So with Life on Paper, in that particular time in life, I definitely felt like, wow, okay, so what's the value of my life? I was when I wrote this play, I was still trying to get my feet underneath me as a writer, right? And I didn't know how it was all going to work out. I didn't know that I was going to be able to have a life in the arts. I really suspected deeply that the road was going to end for me. And, it made me ask myself questions of do I feel valued as a person in society? So I guess the plays are all about sort of those same things, who am I, and do I have value in the context of the bigger world?
I've got to ask you about House of Cards and Star Trek Discovery.
Sure.
How did you get involved with those shows, and what are the challenges of writing for television?
Sure, yeah. So with House of Cards, I had written a play about politics called Warrior Class that had its world premiere in New York the season before I was invited to come write on it. But, Beau Willimon, who, worked for several politicians and really, knew politics backwards and forward. Like, I always take great pride that he read my play and said, wow, this guy knows politics, right? And my understanding of politics sort of came out of writing that play. Like while we were writing that show, we were like, well, how do we make this more interesting? And now I feel like, we're in a world in which so much of that show has become manifest in politics that it's like,
yeah,
wow, like how did we kind of, I guess we didn't predict the future, but we really spoke to the moment.
Back to a last word about life on paper. What do you want people to come away with after they've listened to our recording of your play?
Yeah, well, so much of my fundamental experience in the theater is born out of my upbringing within a restaurant. My family, had this Setsuanese restaurant, and that's where I grew up. And so much of what I was taught is that people are coming, and you have to nourish them. You need to give the best of yourself, and you need to give them something to sustain them. So, in my theater, I always hope that it's a welcoming place for everyone.
That's a wonderful legacy that your parents have given you.
Yeah. I mean, you can tell when you go and sit in a restaurant and eat the food if the people care about what they've put into you. And what I love about TheaterWorks and what I really always aspire to is, just this desire to give people good things to take in. So that's what I hope for.
So one last question. What are you working on now?
What am I working on right now? Well, this morning, I had a really great call with Moises Kaufman and Jason Robert Brown, and we are doing the upcoming musical adaptation of the film Farewell My Concubine, which is a life dream project for me to be working on this work with those collaborators. And, the things that Moises is coming up with and the songs that Jason has written are just so spectacular. And I just kind of pinch myself that I'm getting to do that with them. And on the TV front, I'm still working on Star Trek Discovery, and I'm also doing a lot of work on this new upcoming CBS show, Clarice, a spinoff of the Silence of the Lambs franchise. Yeah. So, and a commission for Arena Stage about the Chinese Exclusion Act. So lots of theater and lots of.
Again, I didn't quite hear. What is the commission for Arena?
Oh, it's part. So for Arena Stage, I'm writing a play that's part of their Power Play series, which are commissions that talk about a particular decade in the American experience, and I'm writing about the Chinese Exclusion Act. The Chinese Exclusion Act was the only law that's ever been passed by Congress to specifically exclude and push out a race of people in this country, and it was the Chinese.
Definitely an LA TheaterWorks recording.
Yeah. Well, it takes place in LA, and it is another comedy, but it does talk about the rioting that happened in Chinatown.
So Ken, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.